Actualize and scripts, man. It's Shalom, man. I'm out here. What's up, baby? Got breath to breathe, baby. I got breath to breathe, so that means I have all I need to succeed. So let's succeed at reading the introduction today. The introduction to the KEBRA NAGAST. Ah, to the KEBRA NAGAST, which we started reading. Look at that. Look at that melanated woman on the front with that melanated baby. The KEBRA NAGAST, the queen of Sheba and her only son, Menelik. We are in the introduction, and we're going to read and grow. So you come in, like, comment, subscribe, share, tell your people, man, we out here reading shit, man. Shout out here reading shit. And we're going to see what's up with this, man. We're going to try to see if there's any do's, any don'ts, any cans, any can'ts, and what it is and what it ain't up in the KEBRA NAGAST. The KEBRA NAGAST. And in the introduction, as I'm looking at it, man, there's a lot of names. There's a lot of names right here. So, man, I might mess up on some names, but we're going to keep pushing through. We're going to keep pushing through till we actually start the book. The book, actually. I don't even know which page it starts on, honestly. Ugh. I'm trying to get to we're gonna see, man. We're gonna see. But hey, man, since it's all praises to the Most High, let's blow up the trumpets, man, like they did in front of Jericho, like they did at the tabernacles, like they did so many times throughout the scriptures. Let's blow up the trumpet, man. We out here, man. KEBRA NAGAST. The introduction to the KEBRA NAGAST, the Queen of Sheba and her only son Menelik by E.A. Wallace Budge. I guess that's who wrote, not wrote it, but maybe published and helped have it translated into English. I don't know. We'll see, I guess. But the introduction. The manuscript of the KEBRA NAGAST and their arrival in Europe, the labors of Bruce, Dillman, Pretorius, Wright, Zotenberg, and Bezold, King John's letter to Lord Granville, date of compilation of the KEBRA NAGAST, the Ethiopian work based on Coptic and Arabic sources. The KEBRA NAGAST, or the Book of the Glory of the Kings of Ethiopia, has been held in the highest esteem and honor throughout the length and breadth of Abyssinia for 1,000 years at least. And even today, it is believed by every educated man in that country to contain the true history of the origin of the Solomonic line of kings in Ethiopia, and is regarded as the final authority on the history of the conversion of the Ethiopians from the worship of the sun, moon, and stars to that of the Lord God of Israel. The existence of the KEBRA NAGAST appears to have been unknown in Europe until the second quarter of the 16th century, when scholars began to take an interest in the country of Prester John through the writings of Francisco Alvarez, chaplain to the embassy which Emmanuel, king of Portugal, sent to David, king of Ethiopia, under the leadership of Don Rodrigo de Lima in 1520 and 1527. Excuse me. In the collection of documents concerning this embassy, Alvarez included an account of the king of Ethiopia and of the manners and customs of his subjects, and a description in Portuguese of the habits of the Ethiopians. In the first quarter of the 16th century, P.N. Gedino published some traditions about King Solomon and his son Menelik, or Menelik, derived from the KEBRA NAGAST, and further information on the subject was included by the Jesuit priest Manuel Almeida in 1580 to 1646. In his Historia General de Ethiopia, which does not appear to have been published in its entirety. Manuel Almeida was sent out as a missionary to Ethiopia and had abundant means of learning about the KEBRA Nagast at first hand. And his manuscript, Historia, is a valuable work. His brother, Apollinaire, also went out to the country as a missionary and was, with his two companions, stoned to death in Tigray. Still, fuller information about the contents of the KEBRA Nagast was supplied by Elf Balthazar Tellez in 1595 to 1675. The author of the Historia General de Ethiopia, Altov Presta Joe de du Quenella. Oh man, I'm messing all that up. That Jesus, oh man. The sources of his work were the histories of Manuel Almeida, Alfonso Mendez, Gerino Lobo, and Father Pays. And the Historia of Tellez was well known to Job Ludolf, and he refers to it several times in his Historia Ethiopica, which was published at Frankfurt in 1681. But it is pretty certain that he had no first-hand knowledge of KEBRA Nagast as a whole. And though he regarded much of its contents as fabulous, he was prepared to accept the statement of Tellez as to the great reputation and popularity which the book enjoyed in Abyssinia. Now, little apparently was heard in Europe about the KEBRA Nagast until the close of the 18th century, when James Bruce of Kinnaird in 1730 to 1794, the famous African traveler, published an account of his travels in search of the sources of the Nile. Now, when he was leaving, Gadar Ras Michael, the all-powerful Wazir of King Takla Hamanat, gave him several most valuable Ethiopic manuscripts, and among them was a copy of the KEBRA Nagast, to which he attached great importance. And during the years that Bruce lived in Abyssinia, he learned how highly this work was esteemed among all classes of Abyssinians. And in the third edition of his travels, there appeared a description of its contents, the first to be published in any European language. And not content with his manuscript, Bruce brought with him a copy of the KEBRA Nagast, which he had made for himself. And in due course, he gave both manuscripts and to the Bodleian Library, where they are known as Bruce 93 and Bruce 87, respectively. The former, which is the Liber Oxmia of Bruce's travels, was described at great length by Dillman, who, to his brief description of the latter, added a transcript of its important colophon. Now, thanks to Dillman, who printed the headings of all the chapters of the Fetha Nagasti in the original Ethiopic, there was no longer any doubt about the exact nature and contents of the work. And though there was nothing in it to show exactly when and by whom the work was compiled, in 1870, Francis Pieterus published with the Latin translation the Ethiopic text of chapters I guess that's 19, chapters 19 to 32 of the KEBRA Nagast, edited from the manuscript at Berlin, which Lepsius acquired from Domingo Lorda and sent to the Königliche Bibliothek in 1843. To the Berlin text, he added the variant readings supplied from the MSS Orient 818 and 819 in the page 36 British Museum by Professor W. Wright of Cambridge. And in 1877, Wright published a full description of the MS. I wonder what those abbreviations are. What is the MS and what is the MSS? Let me see right quick. Do they have abbreviations in here? Okay, in the front where it says Wallace Budge, he is the translator. He translated, he is not the author, he translated the book into English from the Ethiopic. Let me go to the back. Maybe there's something at the back. All right. No, there's not. I have to try to figure out what the MS and the MSS means whenever it comes to some of these places that they're describing and speaking of in the introduction, as well as in the preface. In 1877, Wright published a full description of the MS, I guess it might be manuscript, maybe, of the MS of the KEBRA NAGAST in the Magdala collection in the British Museum. The work of Pretorius made known for the first time the exact form of the Ethiopian legend that makes the king of Ethiopia to be a descendant of Solomon, king of Israel, and by Makeda, the queen of Azeb, who is better known as the Queen of Sheba. In August of 1868, the great collection of the Ethiopic manuscripts, which the British Army brought away from Magdala after the defeat and suicide of King Theodore, was brought to the British Museum, and among them were 2 fine copies of the KEBRA NAGAST. And later, these were numbered Oriental 818 and Oriental 819, respectively, and were described very fully and carefully by Wright and in his catalog of the Ethiopic MSS. I guess that might have something to do with manuscripts. In the British Museum, London, 1877. And in the Zeitschrift der Deutschen Morgenländischen Gesellschaft, pages 614 and 615. It was the fate of the Oriental 812, a fine manuscript which was written in the reign of Ayusa in 1618 and to 1706 to return to Abyssinia, and this came about in the following manner on the 10th of August, 1872. Prince Kassa, who was subsequently crowned as King John IV, wrote to Earl Granville thus, "And now again, I have another thing to explain to you, that there was a picture called Quarta Rizu, which is a picture of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and was found with many books at Magdala by the English. This picture King Theodore took from Gondor to Magdala, and it is now in England. All around the picture is gold, and the mist of it is colored. Again, there is a book called KEBRA NAGAST, or KEBRA NAGAST, which contains the law of the whole Ethiopia, and the names of the shums, or chiefs, churches, and provinces are in this book. I pray you will find out who has got this book and send it to me. For in my country my people will not obey my orders without it." When a copy of this letter was sent to the British Museum, the trustees decided to grant King John's request, and the manuscript was restored to him on the 14th of December, 1872. King John's letters prove that very great importance was attached to the KEBRA Nagast by the Ethiopian people, and even in the second half of the 19th century. Now, M. Hughes Leroux, a French envoy from the president of the French Republic to Menelik II, king of Ethiopia, went to Addis Alam, where the king was staying, in order to see the manuscript and to obtain his permission to translate it into French. Having made his request to Menelik II personally, the king made a reply which M. Leroux translates thus. Damn. Je suis. I know that. Now I'm going to mess this all up. I'm not even going to read it because there's a bunch of French. Je suis, quand people, nesi de fond passe sous la bande, avec si arms, moi, avec si livri. Livri, that's that money, I remember that. C'est loup, doute voix, parlez es la fierté, de si romana, royaume. Now, depuis moi, les empereurs, jusqu'à plus pavé, soldats qui marchent dans les chemins. Tous les Éthiopiens seront héros qui se livrent, soit trudat, dans la langue française et porté, I guess that's important, à la conscience. They are misqués na avance de le monde. And I'm trying to read some stuff and I cannot read that French. Oh, man. The king then gave orders that the manuscript was to be fetched from Addis Ababa, where the monks tried to keep it on the pretext of copying the text. And in less than a week, it was placed in the hands of M. Leroux, who could hardly believe his eyes, having described the manuscript and noted on the last folio the words. This volume was returned to the King of Ethiopia by orders of the trustees of the British Museum in December 14, 1872. Now, J. Winter Jones, principal librarian, M. Leroux says, some old French, and with the help of a friend, M. Leroux translated several of the chapters of the KEBRA Nagast and in due course published his translation. Now, the catalogs of the Ethiopic MSS in Oxford, London, and Paris, which had been published by Dillman, Wright, and Zotenberg, supplied a good deal of information about the contents of the KEBRA Nagast in journal. But scholars felt that it was impossible to judge of the literary and historical value of the work by transcription and translation of the headings of the chapters only. And in 1882, under the auspices of the Bavarian government, Dr. C.B. Zold undertook to prepare an edition of the Ethiopic text edited from the best MSS. I still need to know what the MSS is. Jessica, what's up? Church. The text is prefaced by the learned introduction, which was greatly appreciated by Orientalists, to whom the edition was specially addressed. The chief authority from the Ethiopic text in BootSoulja's edition is for now, the famous manuscript, which was sent as a gift to Louis Philip by Salah, the king of Ethiopia, who died early in 1855. And according to Zotenberg, this manuscript must belong to the 13th century. If this be so, it is probably the oldest Ethiopic manuscript in existence. And though there seems to be no really good reason for assigning this very early date to the manuscript, there can be no doubt as to its being the oldest known codex of the KEBRA Nagast, and therefore BootSoulja was fully justified in making its text the base of his edition of that work. I have collated the great part of the British Museum Codex in Oriental 818 with his printed text. And though the variants are numerous, they are not of great importance. And in fact, as is the case in several other codices of the KEBRA NAGAST, they are due chiefly to the haste or carelessness or fatigue of the scribe. And as BootSoul's text represents the KEBRA NAGAST in the form that the Ethiopian priests and scribes has considered authoritative, I have made the English translation, which is printed in the following pages from it. And unfortunately, none of the codices of the KEBRA NAGAST gives us any definite information about the compiler of the work. For it certainly is a compilation, or the time when he wrote, or the circumstances under which it was compiled. Dillman, the first European scholar who had read the whole book in the original Ethiopic, contented himself with saying in 1848, man, I wish I could read French better, De vero compositis tempore nihil lequit. But later, he thought it might be as old as the 14th century. Now, Zotenberg was inclined to think that it was composed soon as after the restoration of the so-called Solomonic line of kings, and that is to say, soon after the throne of Ethiopia was occupied by Tafsfa Iusus, or Yukuno Amlak, who reigned from 6762 to 77, and a colophon, which is found in several of the codices of the KEBRA NAGAST in Oxford, London, and Paris, states that the Ethiopic text was translated from the Arabic version, which in turn was translated from the Coptic. The Arabic translation was, it continues, made by Abu Laiz and Abu el-Faraj in the year of mercy of 409 during the reign of Gabra Maskal, and between AD 1314 and 1344, when George was Patriarch of Alexandria. And these statements are clear enough to definite enough, yet Dillman did not believe them, but thought that the whole colophon was the result of the imagination of some idle scribe. And the statements about the Ethiopic version being made from the Coptic through the Arabic, he treated as obvious fictions. And he condemned the phrasing of the colophon because he considered its literary style inferior to that used in the narrative of the KEBRA NAGAST itself. For original handwritten, thank you, Jessica. Thank you. That showed what I wanted to know. Abbreviation for original handwritten manuscripts. A very competent scholar saw no reason for doubting the truth of the statements in the colophon generally, but thought it possible that the Arab author might have supplied the fundamental facts of the narrative, and that the author or authors of the Coptic version stated that the original source of their work was a Coptic archetype in order to give it an authority and importance which it would not otherwise possess. On the other hand, Wright merely regarded the KEBRA NAGAST as an apocryphal work, and judging from the list of kings at the end of the work in Oriental 818, followed by 46b, which ends with Yaquino Amlek, who died in 1344, concluded that it was a product of the 14th century. A careful study of the KEBRA NAGAST made whilst translating the work into English has convinced me that the opening statements in the colophon are substantially correct, and that it is quite possible that in its original form, the Arabic version of the book was translated from Coptic original handwritten manuscripts, or MSSs, belonging to the Patriarchal Library at Alexandria. And the copies of this Arabic translation, probably enlarged and greatly supplemented by the scribes in the various monasteries of Egypt, would soon find their way into Ethiopia or in Abyssinia via the Blue Nile. And the principal theme of the KEBRA NAGAST, the descent of the kings of Ethiopia from Solomon, king of Israel, and the queen of the south, or the queen of Sheba, was certainly well known in Ethiopia for centuries before the KEBRA NAGAST was compiled. But the general treatment of it in this work was undoubtedly greatly influenced by supplementary legends and additions, which in their simplest forms seem to me to have been derived from Coptic and even Syrian writers. It is well known that the Solomonic line of kings continued to rule over Ethiopia until that somewhat mythical woman Esther, or Judith, or as some call her, succeeded in dethroning Delnead, and placing on the throne Mara Tekla Hemanat, the first of the 11 Zagu kings, who disposed the Solomonic kings for 350 years, and reigned at Aksum. Now, written accounts of the descents of the kings of Ethiopia from Solomon must have existed in Ethiopia before the close of the 9th century AD, and these were no doubt drawn up in Ethiopic, and in Arabic, and during the persecution of the Christians in Egypt and Ethiopia by the Mohammedans in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries. Many churches and their libraries of manuscripts perished. We may, however, be sure that the Solomonic kings who settled in the provinces of Shoa during the period of the Zagu domination managed to preserve chronological lists and other historical documents that contain the annals of their predecessors. And the second part of the colophon mentions the Abulis and Abul Faraj as being concerned with translating the book into Arabic, and makes one Isaac, who was apparently the Ethiopian translator, ask why they did not translate it into Ethiopic. In answers to this question, he says that the KEBRA NAGAST appeared during the period of the Zagu rule, when it is obvious that the publication of any work that supported the claims of the Solomonic kings would meet with a very unfavorable reception and cause the death of its editors and translators. Therefore, it is fairly certain that the KEBRA NAGAST existed in Arabic in some form during the 3.5 centuries of the Zagu rule, and that no attempt was made to multiply copies of it in Ethiopic until the restoration of the line of Solomonic kings in the days of Yukono Almak in 1270 to 1285 AD. Now, the Ethiopic work, as we know it now, is probably in much of the same state as it was in the days of Gabra Maskal in the first half of the 14th century of our era. Now, of Isaac, we unfortunately know nothing, but there seem to be no grounds for attributing the complete authorship of the KEBRA NAGAST to him. Yet he was evidently not merely a scribe or copyist, and when he speaks of the greatness of the toil which he undertook for the sake of the glory of the heavenly Zion in Ethiopia and her king, he seems to suggest that he was the general redactor or editor who directed the work of his devoted companions, Yamharanab, Hezbekrestos, Andrew, Philip, and Mahariab. Now, however important the KEBRA NAGAST may have been considered by the Ethiopians in bygone centuries, and notwithstanding the almost superstitious awe with which the book is still regarded in Abyssinia, we are hardly justified in accepting it as a connected historical document. But it is undoubtedly a very fine work, and many sections of it merit careful consideration. And for many of the statements in it, there are historical foundations, and the greater part of the narrative is based upon legends and sayings and traditions, many of which are exceedingly ancient. And the legends and traditions are derived from many sources and can be traced to the Old Testament and the Chaldean Targums, and to Syriac words like the Book of the Bee, to the Coptic Livres, and saints to ancient Quranic stories and commentaries to apocryphal books like the Book of Adam and Eve, the Book of Enoch, Kufel, the instructions of Saint Peter to his disciple Clement, the life of Hannah, the mother of the Virgin Mary, the Book of the Pearl, and the Ascension of Isaiah. Side by side with the extracts from these works, we have long sections in which works attributed to Gregory Thaumaturgus, to Timotheus, Patriarch of Constantinople, and Cyril are quoted in great length or at great length. The object of the author or compiler of the letter of the later editors of the KEBRA Nagast, no matter what its original form may have been, was to glorify Ethiopia by narrating the history of the coming of the spiritual and heavenly Zion, the tabernacle of the law of the God of Israel, of her own free will from Jerusalem to Ethiopia, and to make it quite clear that the king of Ethiopia was descended from Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, and through him from Abraham and the early patriarchs. But Christ also was descended from Solomon and the early patriarchs, and he was a son of God. So the king of Ethiopia, being a kinsman of Christ, was also a son of God, and he was therefore both God and king to his people. The KEBRA Nagast was intended to make the people of Ethiopia believe that their country was specifically chosen by God to be the new home of the spiritual and heavenly Zion, of which his chosen people, the Jews, had become unworthy. Thus, Zion existed originally in an immaterial form in heaven, where it was the habitation of God. Moses made under divine directions a copy of it in wood and gold and placed it in the two tables of the law, the pot of manna, the rod of Aaron, and the Shekinah. The Shekinah dwelt on it and in it. The material copy was called Zion, the tabernacle of the law of God. When Solomon finished building his temple, Zion was established therein in the Holy of Holies, and from it God made known his commands when he visited the temple. It was at all times held to be the visible emblem of God Almighty and the material duplicate of the immaterial Zion in heaven. The fame of the wisdom of Solomon reached the ends of the earth, and chiefly because he traded with merchants from the sea coast and from the countries to the south of Palestine on each side of the Red Sea. And these merchants brought the precious woods and stones and scents and the spices and the rich stuff and other subjects or objects with which he decorated the temple and his own palace. And when their caravans returned home, their servants described to eager listeners the great works that the king of Israel was carrying out in Jerusalem. Now, among the masters or leaders of these caravans was one Tamrin, who managed the business affairs of the queen of the south, whom Arab writers call Balskas, the Ethiopian writers Mekada. But neither of these names is ancient, and it is very doubtful if either represents in any way the true name of the southern queen. It is doubtful also if she was an Ethiopian, and is far more probable that her home is Sheba or Saba or Sheba in the southwest of Arabia, as she was a worshiper of the sun, as she was probably a princess among the Sabians. And on the other hand, her ancestors may have been merely settlers in Arabia, and some of them of Ethiopian origin. Now, the KEBRA Nagast says that she was a very beautiful, bright, and intelligent woman, but tells us nothing about her family. The manuscript at Oxford says that 5 kings reigned in Ethiopia before Mekada. And 400 years, Arari, 400 years. Angabo, 200 years. Gerder, 100 years. Sibado, 50 years. Konasia, 1 year. Ooh, that boy, 1 year. If these kings were indeed her ancestors, she was probably a native of some country on the western shore of the Red Sea. But this, as it may, she must have been a woman of great enterprise and intelligence, for having heard that what Tamrin, the captain of her caravans, had told her about Solomon's wisdom, she determined to go to Jerusalem and to put to him a series of difficult questions that were puzzling her. When Makkedah arrived in Jerusalem, she lodged in the splendid quarters which Solomon prepared for her, and she had frequent opportunities of conversing with the king. And the more she saw him, the more she was impressed with the handsomeness of his person, and with piety and wisdom, and with the eloquence of his speech, which he uttered in a low, musical, and sympathetic voice. How you doing? I'm out you. Ooh, I like you. Oh, and my smooth operator. Go ahead, Solomon. Oh, Solomon had a way with words, baby. You like your daddy. You just like your daddy, David. Ooh. Eloquence and musical and sympathetic voice. Yeah, I've heard great things of you, Queen of the South. Tell him, Solomon. She spent several months in Jerusalem as the king's guest, and one night after a great and splendid banquet which Solomon gave to the notables of his kingdom in her honor, he took her to wife. And when Makkedah knew that she was with child, she bade farewell to Solomon, and having received from him a ring as a token, she returned to her own country, where her son Menelek, or Menelek, was born. In Ethiopic literature, this son was often called Walda-Tabib, son of the wise man. Let me mark that. That's a good one. Walda-Tabib. And mark his name. Walda-Tabib, i.e., son of the wise man. When the boy reached early manhood, he pressed Makkedah to allow him to go to see his father, Solomon, in Jerusalem, and his importunity was so great that at length she gave him the ring which Solomon had given her, and sent him thither under the care of Tamrin. On his arrival at Gaza, the people of the city and everywhere in that district recognized his striking likeness to Solomon, and almost royal honors were paid to him by them. And the same thing happened in Jerusalem. And when the officials of Solomon's palace were leading him to the presence chamber, all the household knew without telling that a son was being taken in to his father. Father and son fell into each other's arms when they met. And the son had no need to prove his identity by producing the ring which his father had given to his beloved Makkedah, for Solomon proclaimed straightway the young man's parentage, and made him to occupy the royal throne with him, and after he had arrayed him in royal apparel. Man, Solomon spared no pains in providing both instruction and amusement for Benalekim, whilst he was in Jerusalem, for he hoped to keep him with him. But after a few months, the young man was eager to get back to his mother and to his own country, and Tamrin, the leader of Makkedah's caravans, wanted to be gone. Beni-Eliakim, or Menelek, as we may now call him, saw that Rehoboam must succeed Solomon on the throne of Israel, and had no wish to occupy the subordinate position of the second son in Jerusalem. And he therefore pressed Solomon to give him leave to depart. Yes, sir.
Can we hug, please?
Yes. Oh, my son. I love you, my son. You okay?
Yes, sir.
You just want to hug.
Yes, sir.
You can get them all the time, my boy. All the time. Daddy loves you. Oh, my boy. I hugged you like Solomon hugged Menelik, baby. I just hugged you. We fell into each other's arms. That's what we say Solomon did. Go brush your grill. Oh, go brush your grill. When the king had arranged that the elder sons of his nobles should accompany Menelik on his return to his mother's capital, Dabra Makada, and had arranged with Menelik for the establishment of a duplicate Jewish kingdom in Ethiopia, he permitted him to depart. When Makada was in Jerusalem, she learned that the tabernacle of Zion and the temple of Jerusalem was the abode of the God of Israel, and the place where God Almighty was pleased to dwell. And in her letter to Solomon, she begged him to send her as a holy talisman a portion of the fringe of the covering of the tabernacle. Solomon told Menelik that he would grant Makada's request, but this satisfied neither Menelik nor his nobles. And to speak briefly, Menelik and Tamrin and the eldest sons of the Jewish notables who were destined to help Menelik to found his kingdom in Ethiopia, entered into a conspiracy together to steal the tabernacle Zion and to carry it off to Ethiopia. Their object was to keep the God of Israel with them, and this they expected to be able to effect by stealing the tabernacle made of gold and wood, according to the pattern of the original spirit tabernacle in heaven, which contained the 2 tables of the law, and the pot of manna, Aaron's rod, and so on and so forth. As and C, I'm not sure. I guess as an etc. Now, one of the conspirators who had access to the chamber in which the tabernacle Zion rested removed it from under its curtain and substituted a construction in wood of exactly the same size and shape, which he had caused to be made for the purpose, and the theft was not discovered until Menelik and Tamrin and their company of young Jews and Ethiopians were well on their road to the Red Sea. And though Solomon sent out swift horsemen to overtake them and cut them off, and himself followed with all the speed possible, the thieves made good their escape, and the king of Israel returned to Jerusalem in great grief. In due course, Menelik reached his mother's capital, and he and the tabernacle of Zion were received with frantic rejoicings. And Makada, having abdicated in favor of her son, Menelik established in Ethiopia a kingdom modeled on that of Israel, and introduced into his country the laws of God and the admonitions of Moses and the social rules and regulations with which the name of the great lawgiver was associated in those days. The great lawgiver. The KEBRA NAGAST tells us nothing about Menelik after his coronation, except that he carried on 1 or 2 campaigns against the enemies of his country, and the book is silent in respect of Queen Makada's history after her voluntary abdication. The author seems to expect his readers to assume that Ethiopia was ruled over by descendants of Solomon and Queen Makada from the 10th century before Christ to about the 10th century, for about 2,000 years, and that the religion, laws, social customs of the Ethiopians were substantially those of the Hebrews in Palestine under the kings of Israel. And in connection with this assumption, reference may be made here briefly to a series of chapters which now form part of the KEBRA NAGAST, in which the author endeavors to prove that the kings of the Moabites, Philistines, Egyptians, Persians, Babylonians, and Byzantines are of Semitic origin. The fantastic legend which he invented or reproduced contained much falsified history and bad philology, but it would be interesting to know their source and their author, and these chapters seem to suggest that he was a Semite, probably a Jew. In another group of chapters, which can hardly have formed a part of the oldest version of the KEBRA NAGAST, the author summarizes the prophecies in the Old Testament that concern the coming of the Messiah and applies them to Jesus Christ with very considerable skill. And he devotes much space to the Virgin Mary and quotes numerous passages from the Old Testament with the view of identifying her symbolically with the tabernacle of the covenant. English translation of the Arabic text describing how the kingdom of David was transferred from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. Here is the explanation of the reason for the transfer of the kingdom of David from his son Solomon, king of Israel, to the country of the Negus, or the country of the Negus, the Negus. That is to say, to Abyssinia. We're going to go a little bit more. We're going to go a little bit more. I was hoping I could finish the whole introduction today, but I'm not sure when it stops because it really doesn't have a Ooh-wee. When the Lord, praise be unto him, wished Solomon to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem after the death of his father David, the son of Jesse, who had reigned over the children of Israel, and Solomon, in accordance with his most excellent desire, began to build the house of the Lord, praise be unto him. Solomon, the king, gave the command that the stones for the building should be hewn in immense sizes, but the workmen were unable to hew such large blocks of stone, and their tools broke when they attempted the work. And they cried out to Solomon, the king, and besought him to think out in his wisdom some plan for lightening their labor. And Solomon entreated God and the bestower of wisdom to suggest some means to him. And behold, Solomon summoned the hunters and commanded them to bring a young rook bird. And in accordance with his orders, they brought the young rook bird. And he commanded them likewise to bring a brass pot with a space inside it sufficiently large to contain the rook bird. And the pot had 3 legs, each 1 cubit in height, and it stood upon the ground. And then Solomon commanded them to set down the rook bird in the palace and to put the brass pot over it. But the wings of the ruach bird protruded from under the aforementioned pot and raised it above the ground. Now, when the mother ruach bird returned to her nest in the high mountains and did not find her young one there, she was disturbed, and she flew round and round over the earth seeking for it. And she flew over Jerusalem and saw her young one under the aforementioned pot, but had not the power to seize it. And she mounted up into the heights and went towards the paradise of God in the eastern part of Eden. And she found below paradise a piece of wood, which had been cast down there as if for her to carry away. And then she seized it, and by reason of her great sorrow for her young one, she took no rest until she had brought it to Jerusalem, and hurled it down upon the brass pot. And by the might of God, a miracle took place forthwith. For the pot split into two halves, and the mother Ruach saw her young, and caught it up, and bore it off to her nest. And when Solomon and all the children of Israel saw this miracle, with a loud voice they praised the Almighty, or the governor of the universe, who had bestowed upon a bird that was not endowed with reasoning powers to the instinct to do that which human beings could not do. And straightway King Solomon commanded the stone masons to take that piece of holy and blessed wood, and when they had marked out and measured the stone which they wished to split, to lay the aforementioned piece of wood in the place marked. And when they had done this, by the might of God, the stone split wheresoever they wished it to split, and they found their work easy. And then Solomon became certain in his mind that the governor of the universe regarded the building of the holy temple with favor. And when the construction of the temple was finished, the aforementioned piece of wood remained in the entrance chamber of the forecourt of the porch. And as the building of the temple had stopped, the operative power of the aforementioned piece of wood came to an end, but it was still held in respect. Now God, praise be unto him, having willed that the kingdom of David and his son Solomon should be transferred to the blessed land of Abyssinia, stirred up in the queen of that country to make a journey to Jerusalem to hear some of the wisdom of Solomon, even as the holy gospel saith, the queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment and shall judge this generation, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear Solomon. And behold, from the earliest times, the kingdom of Abyssinia was ruled over by royal princesses. And when the mother of this queen was with child of her, she saw a fat and handsome looking goat. And she looked upon him with greedy desire and said, how handsome the beast is, and how handsome its feet are. And she longed for it after the manner of women who are with child. And when the aforementioned daughter was fashioned completely in the womb of her mother, she had one foot like the foot of a man, and another like the foot of a goat, and great and exalted by the creator of the creator of the universe, who is to be praised. And when the woman of the queen, the mother of the queen, had brought forth this extraordinary being, and had reared her, and the maiden was ready for marriage, she did not want to marry any man because of her malformed foot, and she continued in her virginity until she began to reign. And when the thought of to visit Solomon was here, to hear his wisdom rose in her mind, as has already been mentioned, this had already been ordained in the wisdom of God, and praise be unto him, so that the kingdom of David might last to the end of the world, according to the word of David by the Holy Ghost. And the Lord had sworn a true oath to David, from which he will never turn aside. And of the fruit of his loins I will seat upon thy throne, and if they will keep the allegiance of my covenant and of my testimony, which I shall teach them, their children shall sit upon thy throne forever. And besides this passage, there are many other passages in the Psalms and in the other books that refer to this oath. And this passage, nevertheless, showeth also that the kingdom was to be rent from the children of Israel. And since they changed the covenant, and did not observe the truth, and ceased to believe in him who was expected, God rent from them prophecy, priesthood, and sovereignty. And we'll stop right there. We're going to stop right there. We're going to stop right there. And that has been this reading of the introduction of the KEBRA NAGAST, the Queen of Sheba and her only son Menelik, translated by E.A. Wallace Budge from the Arabic, or from the, it was first translated from the Ethiopic to the Arabic, and then from the Arabic to the English. Ooh, there's some stuff going on, man. They say Menelik stole the tabernacle. I mean, they stole the tabernacle of the God of Israel. Mm-hmm. Oh man. Yeah, man, oh man. This book, I can tell already, is going to be an interesting one. An interesting one. I wish I knew, though, where, I guess this is it. I think I found it. I think I found it. I think I found the part of chapter 1. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and put a little mark by that page. But we'll keep reading. We'll keep going. We'll keep coming back and rising scripts. And we're going to try to continue to read and grow. We're going to seek and find until we here a little, there a little, line upon line, to seek and find the treasures that have been left behind. So we're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing. So like, comment, subscribe, share, tell your people, man, Shalom out here reading shit, man. I'm out here, baby. We trying to learn. We trying to be better. We trying to do better. And you can accomplish them, a little bit at a time. As long as you have breath to breathe, you have all you need to succeed. And you can succeed and succeed at little. Succeed at the little first, and then work your way up to succeeding in the great things. Before you know it, you'll look back and you'll see how much you have succeeded in already. And it'll amaze you. It can amaze you. So let's keep pushing. Let's keep pushing. A little bit at a time, baby. A little bit at a time, baby. A little bit. So, oh, man. Ooh, wee. Menelik, Queen of KEBRA NAGAST, the KEBRA NAGAST. Man, I wanted to read this book for a while now. I've been wanting to read this book for a while now. I mean years. It's been years I've been wanting to read this book. So we finally making an effort. All praises. I wish I knew how many pages it has, because this book does not have pages. Excuse me, page numbers. This book does not have page numbers. So I can't even say, how far we have to go or how many chapters this book has or whatnot. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we started it, and what also matters is that we finish it. And we'll just have to keep rolling through it. We'll have to keep rolling through it. It may take us a little while, but it's all praises. All praises. Hey, we got through the last book, which was the book of Jasher, the ancient book of Jasher. And just the same way we got through the ancient book of Jasher, we can get through the KEBRA NAGAST. It's just going to take us a little time, a little doing, a little persistence and consistency, and we can get it done. So, but till next time, man, be on the lookout later on. We're going to come back later on for family time reading, where we're going to pick up the Desmond Cole Ghost Patrol series, book number 9. Now museum, now you don't. Now museum, now you don't. I was supposed to read this one to my boys before I read it to y'all, but I didn't. So we just gonna read it. Maybe they'll come in here and sit down and hear the story. But till next time, man. Hey, I'm Shalom, baby. I'm out here. Shalom, everybody. I'm out.